I was watching this dynamic play out at a dinner party last week, and it was almost painful to witness, you know?
Okay.
Yeah. You have this guy, super successful, fit, seems like the picture of stability, and sitting right across from him is this woman who's genuinely kind, she's attentive, she's clearly interested in him.
Okay, sounds promising so far.
Right. But he barely looked at her. I'm not kidding. His eyes were just glued to his phone, and you could just see him stressing over a girl who wasn't even there.
There it is.
There it is. And I know the situation with this other girl. She flakes on him constantly. She makes these little snide comments about his career. She generally treats him like an option, not a priority.
It's a classic hot and cold.
Totally. But then his phone finally buzzes. He looks down, gets this dry, one-word reply from her, and his whole face just lights up.
Wow.
He turns to me almost giddy, and he says, "She's just so hard to pin down. It's a challenge." And it was.
Yeah.
It was fascinating, but also baffling. You have this good woman offering peace right there, and he is actively, consciously ignoring her to chase pure anxiety.
Right.
It just reminded me of those high school hierarchies, you know? The popular clique ignores the nice kids, and for some reason, that rejection just breeds more obsession. It made me realize that for a lot of guys, nice just reads as boring.
While the cruelty.
Yeah, while that inconsistent hot and cold cruelty reads as passion. It raises this really disturbing question about our psychology. Why do we mistake psychological torment for chemistry?
That is exactly the question. And that's the focus of this deep dive. It's a scenario that really cuts across gender and status, and it speaks to this profound and honestly often tragic mismatch between what we consciously say we desire, stability, kindness, and what our deeper psychological, maybe even biological wiring compels us toward.
Which is chaos.
Chaos and intense challenge, yeah. We're really looking at why the brain confuses that intense activation with genuine attraction.
Okay, let's unpack this then, because the mission today is to really get into the mechanics of that choice. Why, when peace is just right there, available, do we choose the chaos? Are we just fundamentally conditioned to be attracted to the things that hurt us?
Well, to answer that, we have to move beyond just, simple preference.
Yeah.
We're going to examine 3 core psychological and behavioral mechanisms that I think really explain this dynamic.
Okay.
So first, we really need to dismantle the outdated stereotype about what men are actually attracted to versus what, culture tells us they prefer.
Right, the myth.
The myth. Second, we'll look at the really critical role of early rejection and developmental trauma, where people are sort of trying to rewrite these old, painful emotional scripts.
Okay, the ghost of the past.
Exactly. And finally, we'll break down the very precise behavioral science of those hot and cold dynamics, which shows how our own physiology can confuse stress and anxiety with this genuine addictive excitement.
Let's start right at the top then, with the stereotype. Because culture has been hammering this into us for, centuries. That men want the compliant, agreeable partner. The woman who's happy to follow, the one who doesn't rock the boat.
This piece of traditional wisdom is so incredibly resilient. But it is a myth. The stereotype is just. It's deeply entrenched. Men are supposed to prefer conformist, agreeable women.
Right.
And on the flip side, women are supposed to prefer the non-conformist, agentic, dominant men. We could trace this idea way back through literature, through social role theory.
The classic example you always see referenced is Pride and Prejudice, right?
Absolutely. It's a perfect illustration. You have Jane Bennet, the oldest sister, who is just the paragon of feminine conformity. She's beautiful, she's amiable, she defers to everyone.
She's sweet, she's nice.
She's perfectly agreeable. And the whole expectation from her mother and society was that she would secure the best match, precisely because she was so agreeable and submissive. She really fits that whole pre-World War II expectation for women to embody these, communal qualities.
And then you get Elizabeth, who is the complete opposite. She's headstrong, she's witty, she's incredibly opinionated, and just fundamentally a nonconformist.
And her mother is constantly worried that Elizabeth's tendency to speak her mind and resist all this social pressure is going to be a major deterrent to any wealthy suitors.
She's too much of a challenge.
Exactly. This stereotype, that compliance in women is what's desirable, is tied directly to historical social role theory, which, dictated all the traditional divisions of labor. Before these huge cultural shifts, women were just expected to be submissive and communal, while men were expected to be agentic and dominant.
So that's the cultural setup. That's the story we've been told.
That's the story. But when researchers actually moved into the lab to test this, well, the results just completely flipped the script.
So how do you even test for that? It seems really difficult to quantify something as abstract as conformity in a a dating scenario?
Yeah, it sounds fuzzy, but they were pretty clever about it. Researchers use a combination of techniques across a whole series of studies. They use self-report measures where, participants would rate themselves and their ideal partners on traits related to conformity or uniqueness.
Okay, so that's what people say they want.
Exactly. But they also use what are called revealed preference tasks. For instance, participants were sometimes shown profiles or little descriptions of potential dates who were explicitly described as either prioritizing fitting in or, on the other hand, standing out.
Oh, okay. So you get to see their actual choice, not just their stated preference.
Precisely.
So what was the actual revealed preference? Did the men in these studies gravitate toward the Janes of the experiment, the agreeable ones?
In short, no, not at all. Across the first couple of studies, when men and women rated these potential romantic partners, they consistently reported and, more importantly, revealed a preference for the non-conformist targets.
For both men and women?
For both. These were partners who emphasized their uniqueness, who liked to stand out from the crowd, who showed what's called independent self-construal, which is just seeing yourself as separate and autonomous from your social context. The preference for nonconformity was, well, it was universal.
That immediately contradicts centuries of social prescription. I mean, that's huge. But was this preference for uniqueness equally strong in men and women? Or did it still lean towards men, like the old stereotype would suggest?
And this is where we uncover the really critical discrepancy. It's a massive insight into social behavior, really. Both sexes preferred nonconformity, yes, but then the researchers asked participants to predict what the opposite sex preferred.
Oh, this is interesting.
Yeah. Men, it turns out, accurately predicted that women prefer nonconformist partners.
That fits our modern reality, right? We expect women to seek strong, independent partners.
Sure, that makes sense.
Right.
But the women, let me guess, the women made the crucial mistake. They significantly overestimated how attracted men would be to conformist women. They mistakenly believed that men still preferred the agreeable, compliant type.
Wow.
And the magnitude of this error wasn't small. It was significant. They were basically operating on an impression that was starkly, completely discrepant from the empirical reality of what men were actually choosing.
So what you're saying is that women are essentially, they're strategically misrepresenting themselves in the dating market. A lot of them are acting more agreeable or more compliant than they actually are because they're responding to this outdated cultural narrative about the perfect girlfriend.
That's a perfect way to put it.
They think they're optimizing for attraction, but the research shows they're actually doing the opposite.
Precisely. There was one study that demonstrated this perfectly. When women were subtly primed with a mating motive, so just getting them to think about seeking a romantic partner, they started to display more conformist behavior in the tasks that followed.
And the men?
The men primed with the same motive behaved less conformist.
That is wild.
The women were actively trying to play a role that the data shows is completely counterproductive. This outdated cultural belief, it actually impairs their relationship success.
That's fascinating. And look, if this holds true, it should show up in actual dating outcomes, right? Not just in lab ratings of hypothetical partners. Did the researchers look at real-world dating success?
They did, and the pattern held firm. It was really consistent. They used constructs like independent self-control, so the degree to which you define yourself separately from your social context, and also something called idiocentrism, which is basically thinking of yourself as an autonomous individual.
And they used those as proxies for nonconformity.
Exactly. And then they tracked dating success across a bunch of different real-world relationship contexts.
Right.
So casual dating, casual sex, and committed long-term relationships.
And the independent, unique individual one across the board.
Without a single exception. Nonconformity was a robust predictor of greater dating success for both men and women across all of the contexts they measured. The higher a participant scored on these nonconformist individualistic traits, the more success they reported having.
The entire narrative of the subservient, agreeable partner is just, it's completely collapsing here. So if gender differences did pop up, did they ever revert back to the old stereotype?
No. In fact, when they did, they often reversed it.
Really?
Yeah, in one of the studies that looked at what were supposedly live group interactions, nonconformity was sometimes seen as an especially attractive quality in women, even more so than in men.
So a woman who can confidently stand apart from the group is now viewed with what particular admiration?
That's what the data suggests. And in another analysis, some conformist tendencies, like what they call allocentrism, which is deference to the collective, were actually predictive of success for men in some contexts, not women.
That is a tectonic shift in mate preference. Why? I mean, what changed in society to make individuality so universally desirable?
Well, the primary explanations really point to these profound sociocultural transformations that have happened since the mid-20th century. First and foremost, you have the feminist movement.
Of course.
It directly challenged that prescriptive expectation that women must be subdued or agreeable or solely focused on communal goals. It validated women who display agentic, competent, and independent qualities. These traits transition from being, potential liabilities to being signs of strength and self-respect.
And then there's the other side of it, too.
Exactly. Secondly, you have to consider the seismic shift toward what some call the cult of individualism, which really started ramping up in the 1960s. Western culture just increasingly emphasizes uniqueness, self-expression, and personal authenticity.
We're taught it from a young age, right? That compromising your unique vision just to fit in is a sign of immaturity or weakness. We're rewarded for challenging the status quo and, letting our light shine.
That's the narrative. The word conformist has acquired this distinctly pejorative negative connotation. In today's context, standing out and showing genuine independence is read as a sign of integrity and strong character.
So if we equate integrity with being independent from social pressure,
then it makes perfect sense that non-conformity would be universally desirable in a partner. We're looking for character strength, not mere compliance.
Okay, so the overall conclusion of this first part of our deep dive is that men do want strong, independent women. They want the Elizabeth Bennet of the world. But that brings us right back to our central and frankly disturbing question. Where is the line crossed? Because the man at the dinner party wasn't chasing a strong, independent woman. He was chasing a woman who was actively mean and inconsistent. That's not non-conformity. That's psychological torment.
And that is the crucial pivot. You're right. The healthy attraction is to strength, to character. The maladaptive attraction is to the partner who causes actual distress. And this is where we have to leave the world of general preference and delve into the darker influence of early rejection and trauma, the why of chasing torment. It often lies in this phenomenon of repetition compulsion.
Let's focus on that pivot point because it's the one that's so hard to grasp. Why would a successful, rational adult continuously gravitate toward the exact emotional dynamics that caused them so much pain earlier in life? It defies logic.
It often starts with what you could call emotional misimprinting back in our formative years. So if a boy experienced early, painful social rejection by what he perceived as desirable female peers, the popular high school cliques, for example, that rejection can leave a deep emotional wound, a profound sense of not being good enough for that desired group.
So that early social injury kind of sets a baseline then. It teaches him that what desirable interaction feels like is this high-stakes game of rejection that needs to be overcome.
Precisely. And that wound, it doesn't just heal because the boy grows up and becomes a successful man. Instead, it creates this subconscious, almost magnetic desire for what we can call re-imprinting. The adult self is now driven by this goal of achieving validation from a person who symbolically represents those early rejectors.
I'm thinking of that story about the tech titan, Liam. It perfectly illustrates this subconscious drive. I mean, here's a guy who runs a major startup. He's objectively successful by any measure, and yet he is exclusively attracted to women who treat him with this mixture of disdain and mockery.
It's a classic case. Liam's life is defined by competence and control in his career, yet his dating life is completely defined by chasing these high-powered women, like that attorney, Sarah, who just ruthlessly critique his lifestyle or mock his achievements.
And he doesn't feel insulted by it.
No, he feels a compelling sense of challenge. And when you dig into his past, he grew up as the invisible kid in this super competitive environment, completely overlooked by the most desired sharp-tongued girls.
And now his subconscious thought is, if I can convince this challenging, successful woman who is the modern adult equivalent of those girls who ignored me, if I can get her to validate me, then I will retroactively fix the original wound. He's fighting a battle from 20 years ago.
It's a completely unconscious attempt to appeal to his ego and, retroactively fix that original rejection. The successful adult is trying to prove his worth to the ghost of his past, that memory of the desirable yet unattainable figures who dismissed him. He's not choosing a partner. He is choosing a symbolic opponent whose defeat would finally validate him.
This sounds exactly like that Freudian concept, repetition compulsion, where someone is driven not toward mastery of a past trauma, but just just toward reenacting the pain over and over again.
That is the core psychological mechanism at play here. Traumatized individuals compulsively expose themselves to situations that are reminiscent of the original trauma. Now, Freud initially hypothesized that this was an attempt to gain mastery over the painful experience, to finally control the ending.
But that's not what happens.
Clinically, it rarely happens. Instead, the repetition often just leads to further suffering. It's this tragic, self-defeating loop.
It's like your inner GPS is just stuck, constantly trying to navigate you back to the location where you first crashed, somehow expecting the road to be fixed this time around.
That's a great analogy. And we see really clear long-term evidence of how this early social adversity dictates later maladaptive behavior. There are studies that have tracked peer dynamics all the way from kindergarten onward, and they reveal that early peer rejection, just being disliked by the peer group, is strongly linked to long-term maladjustment, including aggression and emotion dysregulation.
I want to zoom in on that link for a second between the rejection and later delinquency, because that seems absolutely critical to understanding the adult man who seeks out conflict. Why does being rejected by his peers lead to rule-breaking and antisocial behavior rather than, I don't know, just social withdrawal?
That's a key distinction. Early aggression often does precede the peer rejection, but once that child is rejected, they're really set on a very difficult pathway. Peer rejection uniquely predicts adolescent rule-breaking and delinquent activities because it so often leads to social isolation. These isolated children are then kind of funneled into social settings where they associate primarily with other aggressive or marginalized or socially unskilled classmates.
They're essentially segregated into a high-risk group.
Yes, exactly. And this is where a phenomenon called deviancy training occurs. The interactions among these socially rejected peers often reinforce and model and encourage antisocial behavior. They basically teach each other how to break rules and resist authority, developing this shared identity that is oppositional to the mainstream.
So for the boy who grows up to become Liam,
For that boy, the social exclusion creates a deep need for intense, high-stakes emotional engagement. It's the only kind he knows.
so the adult who's now obsessed with a critical partner isn't just seeking a challenge, he's seeking a dynamic that feels familiar to the emotional isolation and eventual deviance he experienced, which, in a really twisted way, felt like the only way to belong or feel significant back then.
Absolutely. The trauma of rejection establishes this baseline of high-stakes, negative emotional arousal that his brain later interprets as familiar or even necessary for a real connection. He is drawn to conflict because that is the emotional language he learned when he was seeking validation from the desirable yet rejecting figures of his youth.
Let's transition now, because there's this other dynamic, the high-status dynamic, which doesn't seem to be rooted as much in childhood trauma, but more in a reaction to current power and success. This is the antidote to yes theory.
Yeah. Exactly. For high-status individuals, particularly men who are very accustomed to controlling their environments, CEOs, hedge fund managers, political figures, they live in a bubble of compliance. Everyone agrees with them, everyone defers to them, and that constant unearned agreement starts to feel toxic, or even worse, just boring.
The compliance becomes meaningless. It lacks any kind of integrity.
It does. Let's take that example of Julian, the hedge fund manager. Julian is just drowning in yes. His staff, his vendors, even his social circle, they all affirm him all the time. When he was with his previous partner, who was genuinely kind and supportive, he felt this crushing sense of emotional suffocation.
He didn't feel challenged.
He didn't feel challenged or truly seen. He felt managed.
So what he needs is resistance to feel any kind of authentic engagement.
That's the mechanism. When he met this other woman, Elena, and on their very first interaction, she called him out on something. I think she labeled his story about a merger, pompous bore. He was just electrified. For Julian, Elena's abrasiveness wasn't an insult. It was this incredibly rare signal of true authenticity and high value. She was refusing to submit to his status.
So her refusal to comply gets interpreted as her having a higher internal status. She doesn't need his money or his power because she is powerful in her own right.
Correct. Her independence becomes the ultimate status symbol in a world where everything else is for sale or can be easily acquired. To Julian, winning the affection, or even just the respect of a woman who offers genuine resistance, is the only deal left that feels like a genuine earned victory.
He isn't looking for peace.
He's looking for a peer who is brave enough to check his ego.
But couldn't there be a simpler explanation? I mean, couldn't it just be that men who seek this dynamic are simply narcissists who only feel validated when they conquer a difficult partner?
Oh, that's certainly a factor sometimes, absolutely. But the behavioral science suggests it's a bit more complex than simple conquest. The drive isn't just to conquer, but to find a relationship that feels dynamic. And in this context, sassiness becomes a key attractive trait.
How are we defining sassiness here? It's kind of a loaded term.
It is, but here it means that dynamic intensity that offers a kind of humorous, witty resistance. It's a cheeky form of playful defiance. It serves as this non-sexual signal of strength and independence. She is unbought and unbossed. She has the strength of character to maintain her own footing, regardless of the man's power or status.
So for a man who's used to unilateral control,
For that man, equating conflict with passion becomes a kind of psychological shortcut. He's been conditioned to believe that genuine intensity, the only thing that can break through his bubble of compliance, must come in the form of confrontation.
Yeah.
He wants a peer who's capable of fighting for her beliefs, and his brain confuses that fighting spirit with chemistry.
So he's not really chasing meanness for its own sake. He's chasing the signal of strength that he thinks accompanies meanness because he believes that signal is the only authentic measure of a high-value partner. This is really complex and honestly quite depressing.
It is, because it explains how a hunger for a true peer-level partnership can tragically manifest as an attraction to genuinely toxic behavior.
And this brings us to what feels like the most insidious mechanism of all, the one that ties together that pursuit of past pain and the desire for a high-stakes challenge: intermittent reinforcement. This is where the hot and cold dynamic stops being just an annoying preference and becomes a full-blown psychological addiction.
This behavioral trap is just extremely effective because that inconsistent behavior maintains the absolute highest level of engagement. If a partner is consistently kind, we habituate to it. It becomes normal.
You take it for granted.
You do. If they're consistently mean, we leave. Eventually.
Yeah.
But when the behavior is unpredictable, the hot and cold treatment, it keeps the recipient in this constant state of high alert, anxiety, and curiosity.
The classic slot machine effect. You have no idea when the reward is coming, so you just keep pulling the lever over and over.
Absolutely. Think about that story, that anecdote regarding Chloe, the Ice Queen. Chloe is dismissive, she cancels plans, she offers these cutting remarks. That is the baseline, that's the normal. But then, purely at random, maybe once a week, maybe less, she shifts. She becomes incredibly warm. She validates her partner's artistic vision with this profound insight. She's attentive.
And that single moment of warmth becomes the psychological payoff, the jackpot.
And because the kindness is so unpredictable, her partner Marcus becomes psychologically dependent. If she were consistently nice, he would take it for granted. But the uncertainty of warm Chloe appearing forces him into this constant state of high vigilance, just chasing the dopamine hit of her approval.
Her cruelty lowers the emotional baseline so severely that her basic decency registers as euphoria. The anxiety of uncertainty is actively, literally mistaken for excitement or passion.
So the mean behavior isn't just a challenge, it's the necessary negative contrast that maximizes the reinforcing power of the sporadic positive behavior. It's not an accident, it's engineering addiction.
And this dynamic, this is what leads to what clinicians call a traumatic bond, right?
It does. Traumatic bonding occurs when individuals form these incredibly strong emotional attachments with intermittent harassers or abusers. And this isn't just about low self-esteem. This is a hardwired psychological response. We see this in batterer-victim bonds. We even see it in hostage-captor dynamics.
How does that bond form, though, beyond just the simple intermittent reward? What's happening psychologically?
Well, it relies on that extreme contrast and the resulting psychological responses. The cycle involves these phases of intense terror or humiliation or stress, which are then followed by submission, reconciliation, and what's called a calm, loving respite.
The calm after the storm.
Precisely. And the victim often experiences dissociation during the moments of abuse or chaos. This dissociation is absolutely critical. The brain literally detaches from the memory of the terror in order to survive the moment.
And if the memory of the pain is dissociated, it allows that intense longing for attachment during the calm respite to just override any realistic fears about the relationship's danger. The pain gets compartmentalized.
Exactly. The victim clings only to the memory of the reconciliation, of the good times, allowing the cycle to repeat. But the dynamic becomes even more powerful and really more sinister when we look at the neurobiology. This isn't just psychological conditioning anymore, it's biological addiction.
Okay, this is where we need to slow down and really understand the biological mechanism. How does trauma and chronic anxiety chemically condition the brain to seek out the very things that cause all this distress?
It all starts with chronic hyperarousal. So chronic stress, trauma or constant anxiety, like the state Marcellus is in, waiting for Chloe's approval, it activates the body's HPA axis. That's the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis.
The stress response system.
Right. This releases high levels of stress hormones, primarily cortisol and catecholamines, like adrenaline and noradrenaline. The system is just constantly on red alert, which is exhausting and, frankly, painful.
The body is physiologically stuck in fight or flight.
It is. Now, the brain has an internal mechanism to neutralize this pain and anxiety. It's called the endogenous opioid system. When the body faces a massive acute threat, like a physical injury or, critically, a symbolic re-exposure to the trauma stimulus, it triggers the release of these natural internal opioids.
These are the body's own painkillers, like a chemical bomb.
They create what is known as stress-induced analgesia, or SIA. And this provides a temporary but profound relief from that chronic anxiety and physiological hyperarousal. Think of it as your body giving you a dose of its own temporary morphine.
Okay, so let me see if I have this right. The chaotic abusive relationship provides the trauma stimulus.
Yes.
Which then forces the body to release its own internal painkillers, which in turn neutralizes the chronic pain the person was already feeling from their baseline anxiety.
You've nailed it. That's the cycle. Victims of early trauma or chronic anxiety may be conditioned to require high external stimulation, that is, chaos, conflict, the drama of the chase, just to activate their own internal soothing system.
So they're confusing the powerful, addictive biological relief of pain with genuine attachment or love.
That's it exactly.
So that rush of excitement the guy at the dinner party feels when she finally texts him that one word, it isn't the excitement of a new beginning. It's the immediate, temporary relief of the pain that her inconsistency caused in the first place.
He's not seeking love. He's self-medicating with drama.
Wow.
He is compulsively re-exposing himself to these chaotic or abusive situations because it is the only way his system knows how to neutralize that chronic hyperarousal.
Yeah.
It is a biological addiction masquerading as chemistry. It's the ultimate tragedy of the psyche, really.
And is there a cognitive piece to this as well?
Yes. There's one final cognitive layer to this addiction, the return to familiarity. Research has shown that when people are in a state of high arousal, that stressed, anxious state, they tend to avoid novel stimuli, even if those stimuli are positive.
Why would you avoid positive novel stimuli, like the kind, attentive woman at the dinner party?
Because that high arousal state prevents calm, rational assessment of new information. The chaotic relationship, however negative it is the emotional territory they know. Returning to the familiar, painful environment is paradoxically less anxiety-provoking than stepping into the unknown, peaceful territory of a healthy relationship.
The unknown feels vulnerable.
It feels vulnerable and risky. So the familiar chaos provides this twisted sense of safety because the brain knows the script, even if that script is completely destructive. It's a truly self-perpetuating loop.
So this deep dive, it started with a man choosing anxiety over available peace. And what we've seen is that while men and people in general universally prefer non-conformity and strength in a partner,
the attraction to torment is something else entirely. It's a maladaptive, yet psychologically compelling fusion of these historical emotional wounds and our own biological conditioning.
We've identified that the man at the dinner party is likely not a masochist, not in the simple sense, but he is being driven by these deep unconscious forces. He's either attempting to resolve childhood rejection wounds by forcing validation from a symbolic figure,
or if he's high status, he's seeking that rare signal of authenticity that he believes only resistance can provide.
And crucially, that high-stakes chemistry he feels in that anxious relationship. It's fundamentally a state of high physiological activation.
That passion is the biological mechanism of stress-induced analgesia kicking in, giving him a powerful, addictive chemical hit that neutralizes his own chronic internal chaos.
He isn't pursuing a partner built on mutual respect. He is unconsciously seeking a familiar, chaotic, emotional baseline that temporarily triggers his body's soothing system, confusing the cessation of pain with love.
It is a tragically conditioned response to a world that wounded him long ago.